Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at Halo Infinite and its dead zones, as well as give some requests for improvements. By default, the camera dead zone is about 23%, and it's a sort of rounded square dead zone shape. This shape is made by setting up a circular dead zone on top of an axial dead zone. This game does have options for both. I say about 23% because the circular dead zone is relative to the remaining range from the axial dead zone to the edge of the stick, so it's a little smaller, and the options don't quite add up, though they basically do. The axial dead zone is responsible for restricting diagonal movement around the axes, so you can see that I'm making some bobbing motions and pointing at pretty notable angles, but the cursor is moving perfectly left. You don't see diagonal movement occur until you break out of these axial dead zones, and this is most obvious when capping the view like this. You don't see horizontal movement occur until you break out of these ranges. The shaded region represents the acceleration threshold, so once you pass through this, the acceleration ramps up dramatically. Horizontal and vertical acceleration are separate. They do overlap right around here. I'm just demonstrating the horizontal threshold. The vertical one's a little more difficult to tell because the view caps, but it's active, inactive, active, inactive, active, and inactive. I'll get back to that in a little bit, but for the movement, it uses pretty much the same exact dead zones. This is slightly larger than the camera dead zone, despite using the same values. And the restricted angles seem to flare out a bit right around the dead zone. It's a little difficult to see, but that's what it does. The shaded region for movement represents the sprint threshold. So if you press the sprint button when your stick isn't in the shaded region, nothing will happen. But when you are in the shaded region, you'll begin to sprint. While you're sprinting, if you fall underneath this threshold, you'll stop sprinting. And you can see this additional line here. If you start sprinting, you have to break under this region as well to stop sprinting. So you can't start it here, you can start it here, but you can move your stick back. Then moving it too far will have you stop. The sprint threshold is kind of an interesting shape. It's sort of a clover shape, kind of reminiscent of the acceleration thresholds of the classic Halo games. Why they use this threshold, I'm not too sure. They could have used the same kind of threshold that they're using for the camera acceleration. This isn't too big of a deal since most players are going to be pushing the stick fully while sprinting anyway, but that's just a little interesting decision there. But to show the largest dead zones available, these dead zone options were first added in Halo 5. The Halo 5 actually just has one option, and this lets you control the center dead zone, the circular portion of the dead zone. It left an axial dead zone. Well, here you can see with the maximum that it's pretty similar. The maximum isn't much bigger than the default, but so it is larger and restricts more diagonal movement around the axes, and with the acceleration range being pushed in more. The input threshold is actually calculated from the back, so a value of 15 means acceleration triggers at 85%. And movement is the exact same. But getting back to what I was saying, So the Master Chief Collection is the first game that we've had both radial and axial dead zone options, and it's really great to have those because you can, one, fully disable the dead zone, and they're just keeping that standard up for future Halo titles. So when I was testing, I noticed that I couldn't see movement at about 1% stick movement. So I've added a very tiny dead zone to demonstrate that. It's possible that the acceleration just started so slow that I wasn't able to notice it, but I just marked it because of that. But with the 0% axial dead zone, you can see that very small movements right around the axes are creating diagonal movement. And the acceleration threshold is a little interesting that it seems to trigger at about 98%. And with a max threshold of 0, you'd expect this to be 100%. So that's a little interesting too. Movement seems to have a dead zone as well, just a single percent or two larger than what I found for the camera. And it does restrict a tiny bit of diagonal movement, though this is a little difficult to demonstrate. These really aren't noticeable issues, but if they can be corrected, it'd be nice, because ideally if you set an option, it should give you that exact option. I'm going to raise the movement dead zone back to normal, just so that I'm not sliding around. Let me place the graph. Okay. Now, the first thing I want to request is a higher cap for the dead zone options. So the maximum value is 15 for both the center and axial dead zones, and together you can make pretty large dead zones, just short of 30% dead zones. However, if say a player wants to use exclusively circular dead zones because of, say, the full diagonal movement and just more consistent acceleration, but their stick leans quite a bit, they might want to increase the dead zone size to avoid that. But if it leans over 15%, they'd have to use an axial dead zone to stop the drift, but that also restricts diagonal movement. So increasing this would allow players to use the dead zone shape that they want at the size they want. So upping this from 15 to, say, 30 would allow players to use the default value at exclusively a circular dead zone. On the other hand, if players want to replicate the original classic Halo games, which used 26% axial dead zones, they'd be able to do that as well. So increasing these options, the cap of these options, from 15 to 30 would be requested. Now, the biggest complaint I've heard is just how slow Halo Infinite feels. The sensitivity is really low for most players. And as far as the maximum turn rate, this includes the acceleration jump. This is actually exactly the same as it was in Halo 4 and in Halo Reach. However, the acceleration curve is, or the general sensitivity is quite a bit lower. So I'm just going to demonstrate the curve right now, showing that on screen. It starts pretty slow and then ramps up a bit near the end and then jumps up pretty dramatically. Now, this is very common for all Halo games. All Halo games do this in some way. But if we take a look at a couple of the older Halo games, previous Halo games, and include the sensitivity scale of this, you can see that Infinite is quite a bit lower. So looking at this graph, you can see that the classic games actually had a higher maximum turn rate, but the general movements are the same as they were throughout the classic games up through 4. So, but Infinite, you can see that the normal movements are quite a bit slower on this graph. The exact value is a little different, but because the curve is slightly different for Infinite, but generally it's about, say, 35% slower than those. So one of the things I'd like to request is just bumping the sensitivity. We could do this simply by raising the sensitivity cap to, say, 20 or something. That would fix that issue pretty easily. But we could also just, take the 1 to 10, which this currently is, and then just boost it a bit. So the current 10 is now like 1.5 times faster, or even 2 times faster, to sort of match what previous games did. The next thing I want to request is the vertical look sensitivity slider is weighted less than the horizontal sensitivity. It seems to be about half as sensitive as the horizontal. This is actually the case for a lot of other games, but pretty much all other Halo games that offer this. These options first came around in Halo 5 and are also in the Master Chief Collection, and they all have this issue. So you can see that this is the horizontal sensitivity, and this is the vertical sensitivity. So the vertical sensitivity is very obviously slower. And of course, this is just unintuitive because if you set them the same, you would expect them to be the same. But this also has an effect on diagonal movement. Angles are simply, how far you move horizontally and vertically. And if you change one of those, you get a different angle. So your angles are biased towards the more sensitive axis, and in this case it's horizontally. So for example, I'm going to use this entryway right here. If I move my stick at a 45-degree angle, perfect diagonal, and this isn't a perfect square, but you would expect me to get from one corner to another if it was moving perfectly in that direction. But if we do that, we can see that it falls a bit short of that. So your diagonals are a lot more horizontally biased because of this ratio, and that makes pretty much all your angles wrong if that's the case, and so that makes it difficult even if you're making correct stick movements to get correct tracking. Since we have separate options, we can just lower this to try to correct the ratio. So if we lower the horizontal sensitivity to about half and do this test, you can see that it's quite a bit closer, and we're not looking for perfection, but that ratio is quite a bit closer, and your angles are more accurate. This is what we've seen a lot of players doing, just using double the vertical sensitivity to their horizontal. But we hit a wall if players want to play at a higher sensitivity. If you want to play at a 10 sensitivity, you can't raise vertical to 20 or whatever the correct ratio is to get them even. So the thing I'd like to request is just simply make the vertical slider the same as the horizontal. If you set them the same, they should be the same. And that's that for that. But in addition to that, getting back to the separate horizontal and vertical thresholds, this actually affects diagonal movement as well, and for the exact same reasons. So I have very low sensitivity set for the AR zoom to try to demonstrate this. So you can see the angle that the cursor is moving at right now, but if I push into this horizontal region, you can see it accelerated horizontally, but now it's more horizontally biased because only the horizontal axis is being sped up. If we do this for the vertical, you can see it's moving it in a direction, and if I move a little further, it's moving a little more vertically biased, normal, a little vertically biased, normal. Now that's a little difficult to see, but if I do this, you can see it's horizontally biased, vertically bias, horizontally bias, vertically bias. You can see that it pivots just with small change in stick movement, just because I'm moving over to those thresholds. So to fix this, instead of having separate horizontal and vertical thresholds, make this a unified threshold. So when you pass over this, circular threshold, acceleration applies to both the vertical and horizontal axes at the same time. This way, your diagonal movement isn't affected by this, and you just move in the same direction you do, just faster as expected. So just have it work like that, and that issue goes away. The next thing I'd like to request is an option for the look acceleration. We have an option for look acceleration, but this controls the ramp up time, so how fast it builds up to the speed. It doesn't actually change the amount of it. And this can be kind of awkward for players since you can't directly control any of the speeds in between this. It might feel inconsistent to some players, and being able to disable that would be great. But for players that like this, they would be able to customize it exactly to their preference. The exact, say, increase has varied between the classic Halo games, Reach, and now Infinite. So you'd be able to fine-tune it to match more closely what those games used with an option like that. Now, getting back to the sensitivity, I would like to request that the sensitivity be raised. I already request a raising to address the lower sensitivity while keeping the 1 to 10 range. But now bumping this to say 20 or even 30 would be requested, because if we disable this acceleration, then this is functionally our maximum turn rate at max sensitivity, and this is pretty low. So raising the sensitivity cap would be useful so that players who don't use look acceleration can still turn fast. And so raising the sensitivity would allow us to do that. Of course, it's a little confusing me saying that we should keep the current 10 and raise that, but then also bump the range up to there. The reason for that is just so that players used to previous Halo games would still be able to essentially input their the sensitivity they used for those games and be able to retain their muscle memory like that. But raising the sensitivity cap would allow players to be able to turn fast without look acceleration. Now the next thing is an option for the acceleration curve. So I've already covered the acceleration curve for Infinite, but to show that on screen again, having an option to control the acceleration curve ranging from, say, a linear to whatever it currently is, ideally with some granular slider, would be requested. I don't know what function curve that Halo Infinite uses. It might not play well with customization, but I'm aware of a function that can be used to actually replicate Halo Infinite's curve very exactly. This has two handles. It's actually sort of a linear curve that moves into a power function or an exponential curve, or a power function. And both handles of this, one controlling how linear it is, the other one controlling how high the exponent is, both would allow ranges from linear to the current option. So even if the default curve doesn't match this, this curve is a good replacement to maintain the current default and give that level of customization. So that could be used, but just some level of customization would be great so that players can customize this to their preference. Combining this with the look acceleration amount option, this would allow players to say, players who want to play at low sensitivities could play at, say, linear curves, but use a high amount of look acceleration to still turn fast. Players who want to play at a high sensitivity can, without look acceleration, can play at a more exponential curve so that they're still able to make precise adjustments easily. The last thing I want to talk about is an option for what am I doing? An aim assist options. So Halo uses 3 types of aim assist, which I'm going to try to demonstrate a bit. This guy's not going to be cooperative, but uses 3 types of aim assist. One is reticle slowdown, which when your cursor's passing over an enemy, sensitivity drops. So I don't know how well he's going to play with, but you can kind of see it snagging on him. So that's one of the. He just jumped over that. The other one is tracking. So the cursor will slightly follow the target when in range. And aim assist is actually quite a bit lower in Infinite than compared to like any previous Halo game. And the third type of aim assist is bullet magnetism. So even if you're off target, if the reticle is red, you're still going to land shots. And this guy is not participating well. Now, bullet magnetism is a very important part for weapon balance. Disabling this would actually make a lot of weapons just ineffective. So I don't want to request an option to say disable that, but an option to disable the other 2 would be requested. Mouse and keyboard already has those other 2 disabled, so offering that functionality to controller players would be great. A lot of players don't believe you can play without aim assist, but that's absolutely not the case, and in any case that should always be an option. I think most ideally it'd be nice to have separate options for each, because some players may not like the tracking, but they want the slowdown. They might not want to have a player, enemies run in front of their cursor and drag them off from the target they actually want. Or on the other hand, some players might not like the slowdown because they have to basically adapt to 2 different sensitivities while playing. That would be ideal, but just a simple toggle would be fine. Oops, and I'm going to kill this guy. So that about covers everything. To sum up everything, I'd like to again request an increase to the dead zone options from a max of 15 to 30. Request an increase to the sensitivity. So the current value of 10 could be at least 1.5 times, or even to 1.5 times to sort of match previous Halo games, but and keep the same 1 to 10 range. Just to increase the sensitivity while still retaining this current range, but also boost this range up to 20 so that that's even higher sensitivities are offered. And that's because being able to disable the look acceleration amount would require us to have higher sensitivities to be able to still turn fast without look acceleration. And of course, look acceleration amount, an option for that, and an option for the the acceleration curve. Just some granular option for this. Again, the function that I mentioned, both handles for this allow customization into a linear curve back into what a very similar curve to what Infinite already uses. So this could be used to do that. Whoops, I actually forgot. Bumping the vertical look sensitivity slider to match the horizontal sensitivity slider. If you set these the same, they should be the same. Merging this, instead of having separate horizontal and vertical acceleration thresholds, just have one unified threshold that just accelerates both axes evenly. And lastly, aim assist options. A toggle is fine, but ideally sliders for the intensity of both the slowdown and the magnetism or the adhesion would be requested. So that covers things. Hopefully, just the multiplayer just released, so there's plenty of times to see these things added, and hopefully 343 can offer these at some point. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a good rest of your day.